Want your folks to play these 3 games from the NLA. Daily Pick 3 cash flow and play with. You will be supporting sports and culture, nation building and our future. So go out and play, folks, make it a must. You will see what the National Lottery is doing for us. When you play Pick 3 cash flow and play with, the NLA will support you all the way.
Starting September 30th, Monday to Friday, these 3 games will be drawn mid-morning, 9:45 a.m., midday, 12:45 p.m., and evenings, 7:45 p.m. The National Lotteries, supporting sports, culture, and nation building.
Sandy Manite.
Yeah. Welcome to Ride Along Live for today. It's Thursday. Thursday. Good night, everybody. Thank you for joining. Thank you for locking it down, guys. Important information today. All right? Important information. For those of you who like real important information, no drama, no BS, straight up hardcore information. Now, this has been a conversation that has been going on for a few months, right? People have been seeking, clamoring, I should say, for information on this data protection bill. This data protection bill, by the way, has been through a lot of controversy from people saying that the data protection bill is a way for government to basically, spy on people or take people's information. I don't know if they use the word spy. Forgive me. But be able to have access to people's information. I mean, both sides have been debating on this whole data protection bill right here. It became somewhat of a big talking point. Yeah, it has been a big talking point. So I think it's important that we bring it into perspective. I think it's time that we dissect the data protection bill, guys, and see the good, the bad, and the ugly, and probably extremely ugly. Who knows? But we're going to do a deep dive into the data protection bill, only because I want you guys to be informed about this particular bill. So there are a lot of people talking about it. There are people talking about it, people creating, some kind of myth about it. People, there's so much conversation. So after today's program, guys, you'll be armed with the sufficient information to dissect and to have a conversation with others on what the bill is and what the bill is not. So Attorney Ruggles Ferguson is one of the most sought after attorney. He's also the former president of the Grenada Bar Association. So he's very knowledgeable. Non-political in this instant right here. So what you hear is not from a political stance. All right? It's not from a political point of view. It's from a pure, how should I say, legal point of view, right? Legal perspective. Okay? Good. Happy. All right, so everybody share. Everybody share. Everybody share. Good information. Lacey J. Wendy, how are you doing? Amica Ventor, thank you so much. So just because it's data protection bill and just because it's not anything cantankerous. All you go share? Come on, man, share the thing, man. Share the thing. Let's get it started. Kyron, how you doing? Big up yourself. Big up yourself. Lacey, big up yourself. Everybody share the thing quick. I want to get it started. Ruggles Ferguson is here and he's ready to talk about this bill right here. On board? Big up yourself. Thank you for being on board. We like that. So should we start or should we wait? Should we start or should we wait for more people to jump on? Because everybody going to be like, so Junior, update me now. What are we talking about? Where we at? Lydia, thank you so much. You see? Yes. I want to go straight in. Lenora, how you doing? Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Wendy Charles, for sharing. I appreciate you. Share a few times, guys. Let's change the perception that is only when it's bacchanal and drama and thing. right? Let's change that perception. Let me put it on a few groups as well. Some of the groups and them that I'm in. Share it here, share it here, share it here, share it here, share it here. So they can't say they ain't get it. All right? All right, the question gonna be, where were you when we was discussing the data protection bill? Where were you? All right. Whoever come now, go have to catch up on the thing later. All right? There we go. Gretel, thank you so much. Thank you. All right, guys. So let's go straight into it. I had the opportunity to have this very lengthy, in-depth conversation with Ruggles Ferguson, who is, again, an attorney at law in Grenada, and he's also the former president of the Grenada Bar Association. Let's go right into the thing, guys. This is the information. Joining us now is the well-sought-after attorney, Mr. Ruggles Ferguson, who's also the former president of the Grenada Bar Association, to give us some information on the data protection draft bill that have been getting so much press in the past couple weeks and months. Ruggles, thank you so much for joining us to give us some more information on that. Public information, which is very, very important. Thanks again for giving us some of your time.
Yes. Well, you're most welcome, Junior. And good day to your listeners and viewers.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
I know the bill, Ruggles, is very, 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 it's a big bill, hefty bill. And we probably may not be able to talk about every single aspect of the bill within this time frame. So let's start here. What are some of the key features? Even before we talk about the key features, the target of this bill, who does this bill particularly target?
Okay. Yeah, so good day again. The data protection bill refers, as the name refers, speaks to protection of data. And before going into the features of the bill, Junior, it's maybe relevant here to sort of put the bill in context.
Right.
It's important to put it in context before we delve into it. Now, we live in a virtual world, literally. It's a technological world, and even post-COVID, during COVID, people use the internet, for example, to do things that they never did before. So it's now a feature of life. And the data protection bill is not really a new bill.
Mm-hmm.
It is just being tabled in Parliament, but is a bill that has been under discussion at different levels since probably over 11 years ago. Then there was some initiatives by the International Telecommunications Union together with the Caribbean Telecommunications Union to introduce a suite of legislation to meet the growing demands of technology and the consequences of that.
Yes.
So, for example, the bills that you may be familiar with, at least in relation to Grenada, you have the Electronic Crimes Act.
Yes.
And that was passed a few years ago, and there was even some controversy surrounding that particular bill, and there were subsequent amendments. But apart from that bill, you have, for example, the Electronic Transactions Act,
right,
that several countries have passed already, and that is to facilitate electronic transactions. So, for example, if you're doing a transaction in Grenada and you need to sign a title deed,
mm-hmm,
then that deed has to be either sent up to you or you have to come down to Grenada to complete the transaction.
right.
The Electronic Transaction Act aims to ensure that you can do electronic transactions, sign off electronically,
Right.
and those will be good and binding documents, just like any other document.
Okay.
So in other words, the transaction of business in the virtual world. You also had, as part of that, and probably even more controversial legislation, is the Interception of Communications Act that very few countries have passed.
Mm-hmm.
And you had with that also the Data Protection Bill.
Right.
So what the bill aims to do, as the name suggests, is to ensure that people's data
Mm-hmm.
in the virtual world is protected
Right.
as best as possible, right? In other words, you have, for example, the right to privacy. Right now, many transactions are done across the electronic platforms.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, you go to a doctor and there are private consultations, notes are taken. You have your medical records, whether in the public hospital or in the private hospital. You go to a lawyer and the confidential discussions take place. Instructions are taken.
Yes.
Documents are prepared. All of that guided by principles of confidentiality. You go to the supermarkets. Now, there are certain transactions. You use cards, credit cards. You go to the bank to take a loan, and you have to fill out forms and say what your financial status is,
Mm-hmm.
how much money you have in the bank, what you own, etc. Because these are requirements in order to access the services. So for people to access services in the virtual world,
Right.
you need to share your personal information with the service provider.
Right.
And it's normally a precondition to get in the service.
Right. Yes.
So, for example, you can't go to the bank and say, well, I want a loan. Full stop. You have to fill out all kinds of different forms and give information
Right.
that you would not ordinarily give. What is considered private and sensitive information about yourself.
No, during this debate, this conversation, there have been two sort of debate. Of course, we heard the debate in Parliament, but there have been some social media utterances about this particular bill and how the possibility of gathering information or abuse of this data protection bill to confiscate people's data from their phones, cell phones, and all this different thing. From a broad stroke approach, does this bill have any clauses in it that individuals like myself, like other regular people that uses their devices, should be concerned about as it relates to data and access to data from government and from other private entities?
Right, very good question. And that's where the concerns would come in. Because when you introduce these bills, there's always the balancing act.
Right.
The issue of the public interest versus the private right. And as you know, everyone has fundamental rights and freedoms
Yes.
that are guaranteed under the Constitution, including the right to liberty, for example, protection from arbitrary search and entry, your entitlement to freedom of expression, or protection from discrimination. All these are fundamental rights.
Yes.
And therefore, now, in examining bills like these, where on the one hand, it is necessary in order to protect the private data of the citizen who has to share it online with others in order to access services. Now, how do you achieve that? Right? And at the same time, ensure that people's fundamental rights and freedoms remain protected. So, and so when I will come to that bit of it, after laying the foundation a bit on the act itself,
yes,
and what it seeks to do, because there is a provision in the act where a warrant can be secured to authorize entry on premises, search of premises, search of equipment, and these areas.
Okay.
Right now, these areas are always controversial areas, and that's why when one looks at the bill, one has to ensure that there are necessary safeguards in there to prevent, as far as possible, abuse. That's always the objective, because no fundamental right is absolute. At the same time, there are certain limitations, and for example, in the interest of defense, security, public order, and so there are limitations that can be introduced that encroach on your fundamental rights, but are acceptable under the Constitution. So the act itself, broadly speaking, Section 3 of the Act,
yes,
speak to its objects. And it says the objects of this act are to safeguard personal data processed by public bodies and private bodies in an era in which technology increasingly facilitates the processing of personal data by balancing, and here is where it attempts to balance, the necessity of, one, processing personal data by public bodies and private bodies. And public bodies here will include the government.
Right.
And of course, private bodies capture the private business places. So processing personal data by public bodies and private bodies, and B, safeguarding personal data from unlawful processing by public bodies and private bodies. So you want at the same time to ensure that when your data, your personal information is with a public or private institution, that is safeguarded.
Right.
And the second aspect of it, which is an equally important aspect of it, is that institution has certain obligations to protect that information.
Right.
And for example, to protect that information would include protection, for example, from hackers and others. So for example, if you have a bank account and you're doing online banking and somebody hacks into your account, steals your money, then the question of liability and who is responsible steps in.
Right.
So it's twofold. One, being able to access the services by providing information about yourself.
Right.
One, and two, having provided that information must be safeguarded from unlawful processing by these public bodies and private bodies.
So let's stick up in right there.
Yes.
So we're saying that as it stands right now, my information, say I went into a bank in Grenada and opened up an account without the presence of this particular data protection bill. There's no privacy policy from that bank that says that if something were to happen and my information were to be stolen, that they would have any kind of whatever.
Right. No, very good. No, that is a matter of, as it stands now, individual contract, because you have to sign up forms. The bank would give you several forms to sign up and would indicate what the extent of liability, what you should do, what the bank is responsible.
Right.
So it's almost like a matter of personal contract between you and the bank. what the Data Protection Bill sets out is a general legislative framework
Okay.
for dealing with all data processed by all institutions,
Right.
whether these institutions are public institutions or private institutions.
Gotcha.
And just to give an idea of the definition under the Act of a public body, it includes a ministry, a department, or a division of the ministry or a constituency office of a member of parliament, wherever located. So that includes government. So for example, increasingly, government, you are doing business of government transaction, paying taxes, you're paying your license, all these things right now, they are done online.
Yes.
You're able to do it online. So what the Data Protection Bill provides is that platform across the board,
right,
which whatever the contractual relations additionally with your bank or your institution, there is always the law and the legislative framework that overshadows all of that.
Yes.
So it's important. So in that way, again, the bill is positive. The objects of the act,
right?
The objects of the act are positive.
Okay.
Because and it is important to understand the act, to understand certain concepts as defined under the act. Okay. So, for example, you would hear the data. It's of course the Data Protection Bill, and data means under the act any record, document, correspondence, memorandum, book, plan, drawing, pictorial, or graphic work. Literally all machine-readable records, whether electronic or hard copies.
Right.
That's data.
Okay.
The act also refers to what is called data subject, which means a natural or legal person who is the subject of personal data. So, for example, you are a data subject when you transact business with the bank. You are the data subject.
Yes.
And the institution would be the data user, right? The data user means a person who either alone or jointly in common with other persons processes any personal data or has control over or authorizes the processing of any personal data. So, for example, in business places, all business places and institutions, you will have data users. So you have the data subject, you have the data users. That's the folks who use and process your data for whatever reason,
right?
That you have approached the institution for.
Does any one of this portion of the act tells or give the method in which this data should be maintained by the whichever company or organization that received that data? Are there any ways, any specification to the maintenance of that data?
Well, it will differ, and there's some flexibility given because the institutions are responsible for developing systems to comply with the act.
Right.
And the bottom line will be safety systems.
Right.
In other words, what the commission, and we'll come to that, the commission that is established under the act and is responsible for regulating the act will be responsible for ensuring that institutions comply with the act.
Right.
So part of compliance is let me see what your security system.
Yes.
All of these documents have been released to you. We give you in the hospital all these sensitive data.
Yes.
How can we be assured that that data does not reach into the wrong hands next week.
Right.
Right. And now dealing with the virtual world is not like you have an office, you have your filing system, somebody come through, break in the place in the night, come through a window and take a file and go with it.
Yeah, true.
In this, somebody can stay at the furthest end of the world.
Yes.
And hack into your system because it's a virtual platform. And that is why that this bill is as important to institutions, those who will be processing the data, collecting the data, recording the data, storing that data, because they have to make sure that when this act comes into place, that their systems are ready.
Yes, firewall and virus protection and all this stuff.
Precisely.
Malware. Yeah.
And therefore it involves some reorganization, additional budgetary measures to ensure that you have the right kind of equipment to ensure the safety of personal information. Because right now people do things and they go on Zoom or they go on this, that is free. You look for a free way of doing it effectively.
Right.
But there's also the liability when you have people's information, that the information has to be protected.
Right.
Now, there are two other concepts that I just want to point to, and that is personal data and sensitive personal data. There's a distinction between the two under the Act. So, for example, personal data means in respect of commercial transactions, any data that is being processed wholly or partly by means of equipment or machines, right? So, for example, you enter information in machines and it processes it and you get whatever is the service that you wish at the end of the day. So you enter that personal data.
Right.
It's processed by means of equipment. Then you have sensitive personal data, which means any personal data of a data subject, and a data subject can be considered a citizen.
Yes.
Consisting of information as to one, an individual's physical or mental health condition.
Yeah.
Two, an individual's racial or ethnic origin, genetic data, biometric data that uniquely identifies an individual.
Kind of like the HIPAA, I don't know if you're familiar with the HIPAA law here in the US, where those sensitive data has to be protected in a certain kind of way. There's a HIPAA violation as it relates to that.
Right. And then you have C, an individual's sex life. That falls under sensitive data too.
Right.
D, an individual's political opinions. E, an individual's religious or philosophical beliefs or other beliefs of a similar nature. F, the commission or alleged commission by an individual of any offense. G, and any other personal data as the minister may determine by order published in the Gazette. So you have all of this, those sensitive data must be particularly protected.
Yes.
Because if there is then an obligation, a legal obligation to protect that information, and therefore there are consequences, legal consequences, including criminal consequences, because the Act creates some new criminal offenses.
Right.
With hefty fines. In fact, the fines under this Act range from $50,000 to $500,000.
Right.
As fines. You also have imprisonment as part of the punishment, which range from 3 to 5 years.
Right.
So that is the seriousness within which the Act imposes an obligation on the data users and data processors
Right.
to ensure that the personal information and sensitive personal information, that those are well protected.
So, for instance,
So then,
just stick a pin right there again. So, in many cases, right, I've heard this because people came to me and spoke about this, where they might go to a local doctor in Grenada, or they might go to a local psychologist to give their opinion or advice, or seek opinion and advice. And next thing they hear, the business all over the road, all over the street. People scared to go to that because the fear of information leaking through the community. Does this seek to also prevent or put hefty fines on situations like that, where small companies or small doctor shops and physicians and stuff like that could also face penalties if personal data on someone get leaked based on their visit to their particular clinic or doctor's office?
Well, it applies, in fact, Section 4 of the Act says it applies to a person who processes or who has control over or authorizes the processing of any personal data in respect of commercial transactions in Grenada.
Okay.
Now, so all of these, so for example, you go to a private hospital.
Yes.
Once you are keeping records,
yes,
on an electronic platform,
right,
you have a duty to ensure that those records are protected for the very same reason. No, I mean, quite outside of that, it might be a situation where somebody visits a lawyer's office or a doctor's office, and probably some secretary or somebody. These offices sometimes are not soundproof enough. So you go inside, somebody else hears outside, and that, of course, interferes with privacy and breach of confidentiality and trust and so.
Yes.
And there are ways to deal with that even under existing legislation. What this attempts to do, however, is to capture those who use the electronic platform to ensure that they also know that there is a responsibility, an obligation, legal obligation now to ensure that that information is safe,
yes,
and protected from third parties, right?
Clear.
So what I would attempt to do, right, is so in order to really understand the act, and I think if that is done, it will enable me to skip over several of the different parts, because we certainly can't complete that in one session.
Yes.
But they are what you refer to as, the Act refers to as privacy and data protection principles.
Okay.
And I'll just attempt to summarize those principles. So the first one is called the general principle. General principle. And that general principle, to just capture it in essence, is that a data user shall not process personal data about a data subject unless the data subject has given his or her consent to the processing of the personal data. And then even the processing of sensitive personal data, similarly, save for certain exceptions under the Act that we'll come to. But the general principle here is that unless, save in very specified circumstances, a data subject or customer gives consent to the processing of the information, then that information, the personal data, should not be processed.
Would that be verbal consent or written consent?
Well, normally with these things, Again, in the legal world, when you have to deal with so many people, you have to have something in writing.
Something, okay. All right.
Right? In fact, to cover yourself, it has to be advisable in writing, unless you can record the consent, the oral consent, otherwise.
Yes.
So that's the general principle.
Yes.
Then there's what you call the notice and choice principle. So the first one is the general principle. The notice and choice principle says in effect that upon a request by a data subject, a data user shall inform the data subject, A, of the purposes for which the personal data is being or is to be collected and further processed. B, of any information available to the data user as to the source of that personal data. C, of the data subject's right to request access to and to request rectification of the personal data and how to contact the data user with any inquiries or complaints in respect of the personal data. Now, just let me pause here because we have to skip them or go over them very quickly.
Yes.
Not too quickly for people to lose the essence of it. But it's basically saying, in essence, that one must know why they have to provide certain information, or at least you have a right to know. So, for example, you go to, let's say, borrow money from the bank, and you are asked, well, what is your blood type? Right? No. Is that relevant?
No.
Is that a relevant bit of information? Right? And now what you have is sometimes overreaching, where you are asked to disclose information that is not necessarily relevant to the service that you are seeking to utilize.
Right.
For example, when you go on the internet, most times, and you click and you want to enter, they say agree terms and conditions.
Yes.
Click if you agree. Now, most people click, nobody reads it because it's too long to read in the first case.
Yeah.
But you click it and you are bound by that. Sometimes you don't know what it says because it says among the bits and pieces of information there, it says how that entity can use your data.
Yes. Privacy policy, which is always updated on certain instances.
It's there, but everybody is eager.
Yes.
To access the service.
Yes.
And therefore, they are prepared to overlook.
Yeah.
What are the conditions for doing so? Sometimes at their peril.
Yes.
And even like you go to the bank for a loan and you are told, well, sign this document, sign this one, the X there. All your concern is that you get the money in your hand as fast as possible.
Yes.
So as you are presented with the documents to sign, you sign off.
Yes.
Because that is the route to getting what you want. Right. So now the point is that it may not be necessary to share certain information with a service provider in order to access the service, because that might be overreaching into your own privacy.
But wouldn't that be regulated then initially, that the service provider should not request certain information that is not necessary? Shouldn't the authority that is set up to manage that privacy or data protection then look at the privacy policy of these institutions and say, okay, well, you can't go to the bank for $5,000 and you're asking somebody for the blood type? Shouldn't the agency regulate that?
Of course. And that is why provisions are made in the act for a commission.
Commission, right.
That would be the regulatory body to deal with these issues.
So that is incumbent on the individual, on the person, on the customer to overlook, or that would be on the commission to overlook, to ensure that the information that is requested is the information that is needed.
Well, the commission is supposed to look at all of this. Now,
Right.
somebody might make a complaint, it might be overlooked.
Right.
Somebody, for example, might make a complaint and then it comes to the attention of the commission, and then the commission can follow up.
Right.
Follow up from there. So thirdly, just quickly,
Yes.
then you have the disclosure principle. And it says no personal data, and it's subject to section 20. But the general principle is that no personal data shall, without the consent of the data subject, should be disclosed. And for any purpose other than one, the purpose for which the personal data was disclosed
Right.
at the time of the collection of the personal data. Or B, a purpose directly related to that purpose. So, for example, you provide the service provider with your basic information, and it should not be used otherwise than for providing you with the service.
What about Pearson? What about agencies, particularly government agencies, piercing that policy? Is there any ability to do that within that data protection bill?
Any ability of who?
Of piercing these safeguards, right? For instance, say you have an Apple phone, you have an iPhone, and if the FBI is doing an investigation and there are information in your iPhone, they could request authorization from Apple or these agencies to unlock that device, right? Government agencies have overreaching powers. Does this bill give government agencies or any agency in particular the ability to pierce the policies that are there? Is that listed in the piece of legislation in the bill?
Well, one of the things about the bill is that it gives the minister powers. And I mean, one of the questions as part of a discussion in the bill is whether, for example, the minister is entrusted with too much power.
Right.
That can possibly lead to abuse. And whether or not state institutions that are subject to certain exceptions, whether or not, again, that can be abused. These are always legitimate questions in looking at acts like these. And that's why it's important to look at them with a fine-tooth comb and ensure that there are the necessary checks and balances within there to prevent abuse. Right? So quickly speaking, quickly moving on, we have had so far the general principle, the notice and choice principle, then the disclosure principle.
Yes.
Then so no data should be disclosed other than for the purpose it was given. You have the security principle also, which is a data user shall, when processing personal data, take practical steps to protect the personal data from any loss, misuse, modification, unauthorized or accidental access or disclosure, alteration, or destruction by having regard to. Now, the security principle, if you note, as it has started there, the introductory part, is that it's the obligation of the data user or the institution that now has stored your information.
One something that kind of stuck in my crowd is the word practical steps. Did it outline what the specification of practical steps? Because any institution could say, okay, they have a firewall, that's practical, but that firewall may not be the best solution to protect data, right? So the use of practical is a word there that, I mean, what is practical? What's practical to you might not be practical to me.
Right. And that is where the list that follows. So, for example, if it's just your name, your address, maybe your telephone number, your email address.
Right.
That versus your intimate hospital records or so, or that compared to your assets,
right,
which are lodged in a bank.
Yes.
All of these require different levels of security.
Security. Okay.
Right? And that is why under the security principle, it is stated that you must do these things. You must take these practical steps.
Right.
Having regard to one, the nature of the personal data and the harm that would result from such loss, misuse, modification, unauthorized or accidental access or disclosure, alteration or destruction. So in other words, the degree of harm that can result is
right,
important in making that determination as to the extent of your security network.
Right.
The greater the degree of harm, the greater your security network needs to be. B, to the place or location where the personal data is stored. That has to be taken into account, the area. To any security measures incorporated into any equipment in which the personal data is stored. To the measures taken for ensuring the reliability, integrity, and competence of the personnel having access to the personal data. So it's not just the equipment now, but you have people, actual human beings,
yes,
who will have access to that data, and to the measures taken for ensuring the secure transfer of the personal data. Right, so that's basically, you get an idea of what there are other things, but that's what the security principle is all about. Then you have what is referred to as the retention principle. The retention principle. And that principle says that the personal data processed for any purpose shall not be kept longer than is necessary for the fulfillment of that purpose. Right. So, for example, if it is something that requires a 3-month service or whatever it is,
right,
then there is no need under the retention principle, because retention comes from the word to retain.
To retain, yeah.
To retain something, and therefore you should not keep it
right
longer than is necessary
on the
in order to fulfill the purpose
right
for which you got the data.
On the question of retention of this data, how would this data be then how would the entity get rid of that data? What's the process of deletion or removal of this data?
And that's where the commission comes in.
Okay.
They have, because there are various ways of doing these things, electronically and otherwise.
Okay.
And that's why under the Act, it allows for the particular entity, because there will be different price ranges and so. But in fact, under the retention principle, the second part of it says a data user shall take all reasonable steps to ensure that all personal data is destroyed or permanently deleted if it is no longer required for the purpose which it was to be processed. So you permanently delete it or you destroy it. Because what you have now is a set of different institutions all over the place having data. And then what may happen is that you have these specialized institutions that collect all those data, all the data now.
Yes.
And it might result in all kind of false information on the system.
Yes.
About you.
Right.
So for example, you have people who have traveled, and when they encounter immigration in certain countries and information pulled up, it says, hey, you are arrested for drug trafficking.
Yes.
These people don't know anything about it. And there are actual examples about that.
Yes. I can see
Send
it.
back on the next plane.
Yeah. I can
These
see
people
it.
have clean records, responsible jobs. But whatever the data enters the system that they were involved in drug trafficking.
Yeah.
And so you see the problem.
Yeah.
You see, in fact, even keeping accurate data, which is one of the principles also.
On that, don't move to the next one quickly. I mean, I love this interaction, and I know you don't have a lot of time, but I want to just get this in real quickly. What does the Act say about transfer of that information? Because we often learn of instances. We learn of one during the US election where Facebook had basically was selling data to a specific company for the purpose of political alignment and using that data. What does it say about transfer of that information?
Well, you're not authorized to transfer, because remember, when you go back, and that's why it's so important to always go to base principles.
Yes.
Because it is from base principles that everything else flows.
Right.
So when you go to base principles, you are not authorized to transfer information to a third party without the data subject's consent.
So this has more jurisdiction. This has a stronger policy than the US policy then, because a lot of information was transferred during the Facebook. I can't remember the company that was this information was disseminated to, but this information was shared.
Well, you see, and that is why also you may have certain situations where certain countries don't have laws, because the enforcement of laws depends on what you may refer to as jurisdictional authority.
Right.
So, for example, Grenada has jurisdiction. Grenada laws extend to the geographical area of Grenada.
Right.
And you may have situations where people do business outside, because the Act addresses that too, but you're registered in Grenada or you have certain links in Grenada.
Yes.
And therefore, the law applies to you. Now, what can happen is that people find safe havens in countries that don't have laws, to which, people are not bound, and you operate accordingly.
Right.
But in Europe, for example, the European Union, they have the data protection regulations, I think from 2018. And every European country, to the best of my knowledge, from 2018 went over to those regulations.
Okay.
So it basically binds all the countries.
Okay.
In the Caribbean, there is a slower introduction to all of these issues, but with the increasing use of the electronic platform. So, for example, somebody in the US would complain, listen, if you had to do a title search for something in Grenada, somebody had to go physically, go through a book, go in a small, cramped office to find the information. Why can't we find it online?
Yes.
Now, putting all that information online is not just putting it online like that. because there are other consequences and factors that you have to take into consideration. That when that information goes online, how do you protect
it? Yes.
that information?
Yes.
Right? And access and all these issues.
Yes.
The other principle that I want to make sure at least we finish all the principles.
Yes.
You have the data integrity principle, which is that a data user shall take reasonable steps to ensure that the personal data is accurate, complete, not misleading, and kept up to date by having regard to the purpose, including any directly related purpose for which the personal data was collected and further processed. So the data integrity principle deals with accuracy. Basically, the accuracy of information that you keep on data subjects or individuals. And then the access principle states that a data subject shall be given access to his or her personal data held by a data user, and to be able to rectify that personal data where the personal data is inaccurate, incomplete, misleading, or not up to date, except where compliance with a request to such access or rectification is refused under the Act. So again, an access principle, basically put simply, without the frills, will be your duty or your right to access your personal data, and your right to correct data where it is inaccurate. So at the end of the day, following these principles, you can see what the Act really aims to do.
Yes.
It is to protect the data subject or the entity from unauthorized disclosure of information, and especially where the information is sensitive personal information. Now, so those are the basic general principles, and as I said, the issues that may arise in relation to the Act.
Right.
Of course, there is a section. Well, first of all, the Act provides for the establishment of what is called an information commission. Information commission.
Yes.
So the Act establishes that information commission, and it says that the information commission shall consist of 3 persons appointed by the minister, and all appointed by the minister, and the minister here would be the Minister of National Security, and having expertise in one or more of the following areas. 1, information communication technology or other like skills. B, data protection, privacy rights, and or other like skills. And C, law. And the minister shall appoint from those 3 members a chairperson and a deputy chairperson of the commission. And just to briefly comment on it, this commission has a serious responsibility.
Yeah.
Put it that way.
Yeah.
And whether or not this commission is a full-time commission, now in some countries, they have made provisions for what you call an information commissioner who works full-time, right? Is a full-time employee. The question can be raised whether 3 persons are sufficient to man such a commission.
But you saying about the commission, which I completely understand, it's a Herculean task. But now the Minister of National Security, right? What if that Minister of National Security or that person in that position is they may have personal grievances, right? They may have some sort of whatever. Say the worst case scenario, right? Could they use that power and abuse that power against political opponents? In your belief, or the draft of how everything is worded?
Well, again, there is always there's always room for these things,
Right.
and the way I always say it is best dealt with is by an empowered public,
right,
who understands, a public that understands the basic things. You don't have to understand all the technicalities,
right,
but the basics.
Yes.
And strong institutions that can impose, checks and balances to ensure that power is not abused. And that's why you have within these Westminster systems the separation of powers, the judiciary, the executive, the legislature, all performing different functions.
Right.
So I say, in an act like this, basically based on what it tries to achieve, it will be pertinent to ensure that look at the minister's powers and say, for example, there is no consultation with anybody for the appointment of persons to the commission. These persons are appointed by and can be removed by the minister.
But isn't that in a statutory body, like any statutory body that exists in Grenada right now, the minister have that same power? Doesn't the minister appoint?
The minister, right. The ministers under several bits of legislation, you would have certain powers.
Right.
In different entities. So for example, in NIS, and just use an example.
Right.
You have stakeholder representatives on these bodies. So you have labor represented, you have the business community represented. So nothing is cast in stone.
Right.
It depends on what the act sets out to achieve. Because remember, government institutions and state institutions fall under the purview of the act.
Right.
Because they also, like private institutions, they collect data and they store data.
Right.
The minister is part of the superstructure, and therefore it's just a point for consideration as to whether, for example, first and foremost, 3 persons are sufficient for an information commission with such wide responsibility, or whether or not you need some safeguards there, and you need stakeholder representation on the commission.
Right.
So, for example, should there be 5 members instead of 3?
Right.
Or should there be 7? Because what you want to do is to create a sense of balance.
Yes. Yes.
Right, and to bring certain expertise to the table that can address what is really a new initiative.
Yes.
A new and necessary initiative, I might add, that is being taken. But the functions of the commission include 1, monitoring compliance by public and private bodies with the provisions of the Act and issuing notices, like compliance notices, enforcement notices, advising public bodies and private bodies of their obligations under the Act. Very important. Another important feature is receiving and investigating complaints about alleged violations of the data protection principles of data subjects. And so they will receive reports from complainants and respond to these reports.
Right.
Undertaking educational programs to promote understanding of the Act. undertaking research into and monitoring developments in data processing and information technology to ensure the continued protection of personal data through administrative, legislative, or other methods, and to report to the minister the results of such research and monitoring, and F, exercising and performing such other functions as are conferred or imposed on the Commission by or under the Act or any other enactment. So now the point is, those are wide responsibilities.
Yes.
And so even to get this effective, the state needs to invest.
Yes.
You need to invest in staff. You need to invest in equipment.
Yes.
You need to invest in office space. You need to invest in human resources to get it going.
Yes.
Because it's a serious task. It's a serious responsibility.
Yes.
Unless the intention is just to have the law on paper, and then nothing happens.
Nothing happens. Yeah.
But that wouldn't be the objective. The objective is to let this law make a significant difference.
Yes.
So and then it will involve a lot of public education and even with the different institutions, engagements,
right,
to ensure that they have their systems in place.
You know, I want to.
So, for example,
no, go ahead. Finish your thought.
Sorry.
No, go ahead. Finish your thought.
No, I was saying, like, you have an Integrity in Public Life Act,
right,
and you have an Anti-Corruption Act, but nothing will happen unless there is an Integrity Commission in place.
Right.
And most of these countries, for years, have struggled to put the systems in place after the law has been passed.
Right.
And in fact, Grenada's commission is far advanced to many of the others, as I discovered over the last few months, to others in the region, even more developed countries than us.
Right.
But the fact is, you need resources to set up these entities. And for example, the staff, it says the commission shall appoint staff of the commission comprising information officers, information technology technicians, the secretary to the commission, administrative officers, and such other staff as may be necessary to give effect to this act.
Wow.
So you're talking about budgetary considerations there.
Right. So, I want to talk before we get off the commission. I want to just have a quick question on the commission and the teeth of that commission. Of course, they would have to still piggyback on law enforcement, because law enforcement would actually say for instance. Well, I should ask, not say, but say for instance, a particular person was found in violation of a statute of the act, right, of the bill. The commission would the commission have teeth to make whatever recommendation or arrest or warrant on that particular individual, or then they would have to hand it over to a certain CID or certain aspect of law enforcement to prosecute, and specifically search warrants? How would that be processed? How would that be dealt with? How the commission deals with that?
Well, right. Well, actually, that was the area I was moving straight to now, because we have to wrap up soon.
Yes.
But so in relation to complaints,
yes,
the commission receives complaints. So the data subjects, whoever lodged their complaints, data users, all complaints will be lodged with the commission. The commission hears these complaints and gives a decision on it. And then there is a right of appeal to the High Court if one is dissatisfied with the decision. So, I mean, in these kind of entities, you can expect scores of complaints.
Right.
Scores of complaints of one nature of another or another. But so what I'm saying, systems have to be put in place to effectively deal with that. But the basic system, complaint goes to the commission, And then if dissatisfied, it goes to the High Court. Now, you have what is called, and maybe one of the aspects of the act that people will wish to give second, third, fourth, fifth looks at, and is the warrant to enter and search, which is Section 33 of the Act.
Yes, Section 33.
It says now, if a magistrate is satisfied by information on oath supplied by an authorized officer that there are reasonable grounds for suspecting that an offense under the Act has been or is being committed, and that evidence of the commission of the offense is to be found on any premises specified by the authorized officer, the magistrate may issue a warrant authorizing the authorized officer, A, to enter the premises, B, to search the premises. Let me just pause a bit, though, to say you hear mention of the word authorized officer.
Yes.
Right? Authorized officer. And under the Act, an authorized officer means an officer under Section 44 of the Act who has been authorized in writing for the purpose of carrying out certain functions under the Act. Authorized in writing. Now, what Section 44 says is that the chief executive officer or the commission itself may delegate any power or function under this Act to an authorized officer. Right? So that authorized knowledge, and who is the chief executive officer? The chief executive officer means the officer for the time being exercising the highest level of administrative functions within a public body or a private body. Now, this chief executive officer in a private body or a public body can authorize someone who is a civilian, more likely than not, based on the definitions here, who then can go to a magistrate to obtain a warrant authorizing that person to enter the premises, to search the premises, see to inspect, examine, operate, and test any equipment found on the premises and which is used or intended to be used for the processing of personal data. That can include computers, of course, cell phones.
Yeah.
To inspect and seize any documents or other materials found on the premises and which may constitute evidence of the commission of the offense. To require any person on the premises to provide an explanation of any document or other material found on the premises. No, you require people to require any person on the premises.
Yeah.
Provide other information as may reasonably be required to determine whether the data user has committed the offense. Now, again, how do you achieve that? I've seen that in some legislation, but how do you require the person to do that? If they do not do that and choose, for example, to exercise the right to silence,
yes,
what are the consequences?
Well, that everybody have a right to silence, isn't it?
But right, so I mean, it's just how it's crafted, and I'm saying, but more importantly, whether or not this authorization should be to a law enforcement police officer, as is normal for the issue of warrants.
Yes.
And I have seen in some legislation where you actually, the police get it, the warrant.
Yes.
And the police are accompanied by civil, in other words, persons from the commission. They might have technical persons who go on the scene. But this act is phrased in a way when authorized officer can actually go and conduct the search. It makes no mention in this section of a police officer.
Ooh.
And I personally think this section needs to be reviewed and pondered and other legislation looked at. In fact, Antigua has similar legislation. We have a number of countries with data protection acts already. Trinidad in 2011.
Yes.
Antigua 2013, Cayman Islands 2017. You had more recently Barbados 2020 and Jamaica fairly recently.
Yes.
Now these acts are extensive. And interestingly, in the Antigua Act, there's no such section for warrants to enter and search, seize and search equipment. Whether or not it's a deficiency in the Act, but it's just interesting that certain of the provisions are identical to this draft, but they have, maybe because of outcries, I'm not sure as yet, but there is no provision like this. And you see, when it comes now to dealing with sensitive information and going into things like computers and cell phones, which contain the life of individuals.
Yes.
Or if somebody loses a cell phone, is all kind of withdrawal symptoms and so, because your very life is there.
Yes.
And whether or not you just carte blanche, you have an authorization for a warrant that gives you this widespread powers and sweeping powers. In fact, there are several years ago, 6 years ago, I did a constitutional motion with regard to the searching of cell phones and computers. And the High Court had ruled favorably in favor of the applicant that you need special warrants for that. Searching premises is one thing. But a cell phone or computer inherently, these are not, you can take drugs, you can take illegal firearms.
Yes.
But a cell phone is not an illegal item. And therefore, unless a warrant specifically authorizes you to proceed to search these bits of equipment, then you have no authority to do so, because that is invading the very privacy of the individual.
So if the act had said the authorized personnel here being a police officer, would it have made a big difference instead of any other individual? If it authorized a police officer or someone of a certain rank in the police force?
Well, at least, the police are connected with law enforcement. Who is this authorized officer? Because the authorized officer can be anybody.
Yes.
The authorized officer, in other words, is anybody who is authorized.
Yes, anybody who's
could
authorized.
Be you.
Yeah. Yeah. They could just pinpoint me and say, okay,
you
be
the
authorized
officer.
Yeah.
We, the commission, or even the chief executive officer of a private entity.
Yeah.
But that's what the CEO is. And therefore, the issue of giving authorization to just any face with such sweeping powers.
Yes.
Right? And that's where you look at balancing constitutional rights, because you have a right not to be, not to have your home entered and searched arbitrarily.
Yes.
Or your business place. That's a constitutional right. Of course, the right is not absolute. But if you are curtailing the right to meet certain public interest requirements, then it must be clearly spelled out.
Right.
So could it be anybody?
Yeah.
Or should it be at a certain level of the police service?
Right.
Right. So, and then what are the powers? Under some legislation, they have, after a search and seizure, there are certain accounting requirements.
Yes.
That need to be followed up on. So they are overall, it's an act that is required, no doubt.
Yes.
Because it protects data subjects.
Yes.
Against the misuse of their information and the right to privacy. So that is the positives. But what I think one needs to do, and that's why it's so important to have the overall public education and engagement with stakeholders.
Yes.
Because the institutions themselves that would be directly affected, and not just not just affected in terms of obligations, but financial resources also.
Yes. I see.
So, but I may have some time constraints.
Yeah, I understand. And I
realize I have some time constraints.
Yes. Listen, I thank you so much. You did such a great job in All right, guys. Sorry we can't take any questions to Ruggles Ferguson because he did have some time constraints earlier, so we had to pre-record this interview. But I hope that this was a little bit more informative and give more in-depth information on the Data Protection Act, right? I'm expecting to have another attorney sometime next week who's going to be live on the program, so we could take your questions. I saw a whole heap of questions coming in. I'm sorry I couldn't ask him because, of course, as I said, it was a pre-recording that was done just an hour or so ago. All right, but as again, guys, there are so much more information. There are so much more things that we need to learn about it, and it's important information like this that give people more in depth. Give people more analytics in terms of this data protection bill. So whenever they come across it, they could have the conversation, in a position of knowledge, right? I myself learned a lot more about the Data Protection Act. Again, guys, next week, I promise you that we're going to have another lawyer who's going to be live. So we'll take your questions, everyone questions on this, because there are a lot of public consultation. There are a lot of, public education and awareness that need to be done so people could understand this in much more fine details. Okay. Yeah, it was a pre-recording. I just recorded the interview with him an hour ago because he couldn't make it at the 6 o'clock time slot. Thank you guys for watching. We appreciate you so much. On behalf of all our production team here at Ride Along Live, our senior executive producer Lois JJ, our moderator there, Kibbs. Happy birthday to Gail Charles, our moderator. Thank you so much and happy birthday. Have a blessed one. And of course, Deanne Fraser. From all of our team here, everyone at Ride Along, good night, everybody. See you tomorrow. Right, trivia tomorrow, 6 p.m. Don't miss it.
Grenada. It's TGIF time again with the NLA. Thank goodness it's Friday. Every Friday in March, place 5 bets or more in a single ticket purchase on Cash 4, Pick 3 or Play Away. You automatically receive a Quick Pick inline ticket valued at $1. NLA is giving back more plays, more chances, more opportunities, and more prizes. Remember, when you play, you are supporting sports, culture, and nation building. Promotion ends March 31st. You must be 18 years and over to participate.
Established in 1998, Ross Road and Funeral Services continues to assist you plan the ideal funeral or memorial service locally or internationally. Our reputation is built on providing personalized funeral services based on love and compassion. Call Ross Road and Funeral Services at 718-547-0640.
Ross Road and Funeral Services, where your loved one is our loved one.
Also, guys, I got to tell you about this. The NDC Support Group of Canada presents the Honorable Prime Minister, Honorable Dickon Mitchell, and his delegation, a visit to Toronto, Canada 2023 as a Canada Day long weekend. It's going to be an amazing event, guys. For more information and tickets, you could contact the number 647-859-4142. Canada will be there.
Williams Funeral Service serve you with dignity and compassion as you mourn. Every day, we embark on the journey of life, and one day, the journey will end. It's on that day that you can entrust the celebration of life of your loved ones to David Williams Funeral Service. Call 718-291-3823.